My brother started an affair with my wife, and I found out that the child I had been raising was actually his son. 15 years later, his children began to envy my heir and demand the same treatment for themselves. The LinkedIn notification popped up while I was studying the quarterly reports. A flawless photo, a polished profile. The education section listed the University of Minnesota. The name was Vairal Thorn. It meant nothing to me, but the preview text made me tense up. Hi, Zarin. I know this will sound unexpected, but I've been following Nix's successes on social media. I opened the message. It was written extremely politely and carefully, the kind of letter people rehearse for a long time before sending. Vairal had seen Nix at a business event in Denver last month. She mentioned his internship with the Trade Commission, the conferences where he speaks. That entire life I had been building for him for a decade and a half. Then came the request: mentorship, advice, maybe recommendations in the commodities sector, where I have accumulated vast experience. I looked closely at her photo, 19 years old, Kale's eyes. She wasn't to blame for the resemblance, but it was too obvious. I closed my laptop, poured some coffee, and sat in silence for 20 minutes. Nix is now 23 years old. He graduated near the top of his class, works in international trade negotiations. He has that confidence that only people who know there is always solid support behind them possess. We talk twice a week. He never asks for handouts, only advice, a different perspective, or a fact check when he gets too lost in thought. I didn't raise a dependent. I raised a true professional. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Vairal. I know you had a conflict with my father many years ago, but family is family, right? My brother Sora and I would really like to establish contact. Nix is still our half-brother, and you have been such an amazing mentor to him. Family is family. I read that line 3 times. Such audacity even evoked a kind of respect. 15 years of dead silence, and they suddenly show up because they saw success and wanted to be part of it. Not because they cared about Nix when he was 8 years old and his world was falling apart. Not because they were interested in him during school or college. They simply needed access to a resource. I could have ignored it or blocked the sender, but the phrase about family ties got stuck in my throat like a bone. I opened my laptop and typed a reply. Saturday, 2 o'clock. The Westmont restaurant on Archer Street. A private room. Bring your father. I sent it. Then I booked the place. A quiet hall where no one would disturb us. I went to the home safe and took out 2 folders that I hadn't touched in several months. The first one I had kept for 15 years. The divorce papers with Lyra's signature. Records of transferring all assets into Nix's educational trust before she could touch them. Bank statements confirming Kale and Lyra's secret meetings while I worked 70 hours a week. Logs of hundreds of messages. And the DNA test. The one with the number I would never forget. 0% probability of paternity. I set that folder aside and opened the second one. It was newer, prepared by my lawyer last week, as soon as I received Vairal's first message and realized where this was heading. But the first document inside was old. I ran my finger over the title. Voluntary Waiver of Parental Rights and Claims. Kale's signature at the bottom was dated 3 days after the test results came in. He signed it in a diner at 6 in the morning, because I gave him a choice. Disappear forever or face a public paternity suit that would destroy what was left of his music career. He chose the easy way out, as always. Beneath that document lay the trust structure I had strengthened over the years. Nix is the sole beneficiary of my estate, connections, and resources. This decision is irrevocable. Even if I wanted to add someone, Nix's consent would be required. I planned for this, knowing such a day would come. Sooner or later, someone from Kale's circle would see the fruits of my labor and decide they deserved a share. I put the folders into my bag. Another message arrived from Vairal. Thank you so much. We will be there. Looking forward to meeting you. I didn't reply. In 2 days, they would understand why Nix gets everything, and they get nothing. Not because of my cruelty, but because of my consistency. 15 years ago, their father chose between responsibility and convenience. He made a mistake. Now they would have to live with it. Back then, 15 years ago, I was 27. It started with a trifle. I was sorting through documents in the home archive. Taxes, insurance policies, ordinary papers. I came across Nix's birth hospital statement. The date was correct, April 14th. But the notes read, full-term pregnancy, 39 weeks and 6 days. I froze, staring at the text. Lyra had always claimed Nix was born 2 weeks early. Her mother still recalled at family dinners how they were worried about him and how tiny he was. At the time, I was on a business trip in Singapore and arrived when my son was 3 days old. But if he was full term, I opened my work calendar for that year. The Singapore trip lasted from late January through early March. I was away exactly during the period when conception would have occurred. Inside, everything went cold. I tried to convince myself I was wrong, that the hospital had mixed something up. But the facts were stubborn. I started digging deeper. Lyra's bank statements, restaurant bills, hotels on weekdays, all during February and March while I was on the other side of the world. And then I found the phone records, hundreds of messages to the same number. I checked it against my contacts, Cale, my brother, the one who lived in our guest room because his career wasn't going well and he needed to get back on his feet. He lived with us for 6 months, ate our food, and complained that the industry didn't understand him. He moved out right after Nix was born. Lyra explained it as a fight over creative differences. It seemed logical then. Now it took on a different meaning. I didn't cause a scene. I ordered a DNA test with express delivery. When the kid arrived, I waited for the right moment. Nix had a sore throat that week. Nothing serious, but I took him to the clinic anyway. While the nurse checked his temperature, I took a cheek swab. I told my son it was a test for an infection. He believed me. Why wouldn't he? I was his father, after all. I took my own swab in the car on the way home. I sent the samples to the lab. 2 weeks of waiting. I went to work, had dinner with my wife and the boy I had raised since birth, read him bedtime stories, and pretended everything was normal. Secretly, I hoped I was just paranoid and that there was an explanation for everything. The envelope arrived on Thursday, plain, white, with the lab's logo in the corner. My hands were shaking as I opened it in the car. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. Not 1%, not a margin of error, 0. Nix was not my son. I sat in the car for over an hour. The sun set, the streetlights came on. I watched neighbors walk their dogs, watched lights turn on in different rooms of my house. I waited for something inside to explode, rage or grief. But instead, clarity came, cold and absolute. I took out my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to a divorce lawyer. I left a message requesting an urgent consultation. The second was to a financial advisor, to whom I asked questions about asset protection and an educational trust. The third was to a family mediator to discuss custody when paternity is undisputed. Then I got out of the car. Lyra was in the kitchen. She was humming something, unpacking grocery bags. When she saw me, she smiled. "You're late. Rough day?" "Long meeting," I replied. Nix ran in from the living room and hugged my neck. I picked him up. "Daddy, will you help me with my science project?" "Of course, buddy. Give me 10 minutes to change." I looked at Lyra over his shoulder. She was still smiling, putting cereal boxes into the cupboard. She had no idea. I put Nix down and went upstairs. In my briefcase, next to my laptop, lay the DNA test. Tomorrow morning, while Lyra was still asleep, I would make one more call, to Cale. I wouldn't shout or threaten. I would simply give him one chance to voluntarily give up his rights or face a public scandal that would bury his future. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, I helped my son glue cotton balls onto a sheet of cardboard. While we worked, I explained the process of cloud formation. At that moment, I clearly realized, no matter what happened next, Nix would remain my son. Biological relation meant nothing to me. At exactly 6 in the morning, I called Cale. He picked up only after the 4th ring, his voice heavy with sleep. He asked what was wrong. I told him to meet me at Bernie's Diner on 5th Street in 1 hour, and warned him to come alone. To his questions, I replied only by repeating my demand to show up on time, and hung up. I arrived first. I ordered coffee and took a seat in the back booth, where no one could overhear us. The folder with documents already lay on the table in front of me. Cale walked in at exactly 7 o'clock. He looked confused and noticeably nervous. When he sat down across from me and tried to say something, I silently pushed the folder toward him and told him to open it. I watched his face closely as he examined the contents. On top lay the DNA test result. Beneath it was a detailed timeline of events. Then came printouts of phone records confirming hundreds of text messages between him and Lyra. Cale turned pale instantly. He started to make excuses, but I cut him off. My voice was steady and dry, as if I were discussing the terms of an ordinary business contract. I laid out two possible scenarios for him. The first involved filing a paternity lawsuit. That would become public knowledge. The names of Cale and Lyra, the details of their affair, everything would go into official records. The discovery process would allow all evidence to be seized, correspondence, hotel bills, and so on. I emphasized that such publicity would likely not help his career, especially before his new album's release next month. Cale was silent. Then I offered the second option and placed a pre-prepared legal document on the table. It was a voluntary waiver of parental rights and any claims. By signing it, he walked away clean. No publicity, no scandal, and no child support obligations, since he would not officially acknowledge the child. But he would also lose all rights to him forever. When Cale tried to object, claiming it was his son, I reminded him of reality. Nix was a child he helped conceive while living in my house. There is a huge difference between a biological act and fatherhood. I put a pen on top of the papers and gave him 5 minutes to think. The clock started. After 4 minutes, he was still wavering, looking from the DNA test to me. Finally, he took the pen and signed. I took the document, put it in my briefcase, and stood up. My final words were absolutely clear. No more contact with Lyra or Nix. For us, he ceased to exist. I walked out of the diner without looking back. Lyra was next. That same day, I filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences as the reason. There was no mention of infidelity or paternity disputes in the filing. My lawyer drafted the papers so that I would receive primary physical custody of Nix and sole authority to make all major decisions. Lyra would be entitled only to supervised visitation if she wished, but I knew she wouldn't insist once she understood the alternative. Before starting the divorce process, I moved the assets. $43,000 from our joint savings account was transferred into an irrevocable educational trust for Nix. I became the sole trustee. Legally, that money became inaccessible to both me and Lyra. It could be spent only on our son's education. The house was in my name only, as I had bought it 2 years before our marriage. As for the equipment for her art studio, I had helped her finance it on credit last year. All the bills were signed by her, and that debt remained her personal responsibility. I waited until evening. When Nix was asleep, we sat down at the kitchen table. I placed the divorce papers in front of Lyra. She stared at them for a long time, then at me, asking what this meant. I replied that it was obvious. She tried to talk about reconciliation, but I gave an ultimatum. Either she signed everything now, or I would file a complaint stating the reason and subpoena Cale as a witness. Her face went white. She tried to explain, but I didn't need her excuses. I demanded that she sign the papers and move out by the end of the month. When she asked about Nix, I told her that he would stay with me. In response to her protest, I simply showed her the DNA test result on my phone screen. Lyra burst into tears. I calmly explained that I could turn a custody battle into a public and very ugly process, or we could resolve this like adults. 2 days later, she signed all the papers, but I didn't stop there. My lawyer prepared documents to create a permanent trust structure, under which Nix became the sole heir to all my property, business connections, and resources. The terms were set as rigidly as possible. Even if I later wanted to add someone to the beneficiary list, I would need Nix's written consent. Then I packed our things, quit my job, and found a new one in another state. There were better prospects and a higher salary. We moved 800 miles away from Lyra and Cale. Before leaving, I spoke to my son. I explained it to him as simply as I could. Mommy and I would no longer be husband and wife, but he would stay with me, and that was final. To his quiet, "Why?" I answered that adults sometimes make decisions that don't work out. I assured him that he wasn't to blame for anything, and that I would always be there for him. We started fresh. Years passed, Nix grew up, and I rebuilt my career. We never mentioned Lyra or Cale. They became distant background noise until our son's 18th birthday. At the celebration, I handed him a sealed envelope. I said that he was an adult now, and if he wanted to know the whole truth, it was inside. Otherwise, we could simply burn it together. Nix looked at the envelope for a long time, then slowly opened it and read the first page, the DNA test result. His face remained calm. He asked if I had ever regretted keeping him. I answered without a shadow of doubt, not for 1 second. He closed the envelope, saying he didn't need the rest. That night, we stood by the fireplace and watched the pages turn black and turn to ash. The The past disappeared with the smoke, but I kept copies in my desk drawer. I knew that one day, Cale's comfortable world would crack, and then I had to be ready. Saturday arrived. I came to the Westmont Hotel 15 minutes early. After speaking with the manager, I made sure the private room was ready. In the center stood a round table and 4 chairs, a perfect setup with no distractions. I placed both folders in front of me and waited. They arrived exactly at 2 o'clock. Vairal entered first. She was dressed in a business-like manner, trying to look like a serious student. Behind her came 17-year-old Sora, who was clearly uncomfortable in a formal shirt. Cale came last. He had aged significantly. There was a weariness in his appearance from years of compromising with his conscience. He avoided my gaze. Vairal smiled and extended her hand, thanking me for the meeting. I shook her hand and gestured for them to sit. Sora looked around nervously, while Cale kept his eyes on the table. Vairal began a rehearsed casual conversation, praising the restaurant's interior. I interrupted her by asking the purpose of their visit. She hesitated and glanced at her father, but Cale didn't rush to help her. Then she cautiously spoke about seeing Nix's successes and wanting to learn from me as well. She mentioned mentorship and guidance, calling us one family. I asked her to be more specific. Then Sora spoke up. He quietly talked about opportunities, about access to the resources and connections that Nix had. Vairal added that we were, after all, relatives, as if that alone gave them some rights. I looked at each of them, holding a long pause. Then I took both folders out of my bag and placed them on the table. I warned them that I was about to show them something, and they were not to interrupt me until I finished. They nodded, bewildered. I opened the first folder, took out a document, and slid it toward Vairal. While she read it, I watched her face change. The moment the meaning sank in, she turned deathly pale. She asked what it was. In a calm tone, I explained that it was a paternity test from 15 years ago. Nix was not my biological son. He was Cale's son. Dead silence filled the room. Sora snatched the paper from his sister's hands, and after reading it, looked at his father. Cale said nothing. I continued laying out documents one by one. April 14th, the date of birth. All of March and half of February that year, I was on a business trip in Singapore, while their father was living in my guest room. Bank statements confirmed expenses at hotels and restaurants during the hours I was working abroad to support all of them. Then I presented phone records for 6 months, hundreds of messages. I laid out the timeline clearly and methodically. Every piece of evidence was in its place. Vairal looked at Cale in horror, realizing that he had had an affair with the wife of the man who trusted him. Sora's voice trembled as he understood that Nix was their biological half-brother. I confirmed it. Vairal looked again at the documents, then at her father, unable to comprehend the scale of the truth being revealed. If he's not your son, why did you raise him? That question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Being a father is not a matter of biology. It is a matter of presence and responsibility. Cale finally tried to speak, his voice trembling. Zarin, I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. You will not say a word until I am finished. His mouth snapped shut. I reached for the second folder, the newer one, pulled it toward me, and slowly opened it. The first document inside was pristine, a fresh form with an official legal heading. I slid it across the table toward him. Cale's face went pale instantly as he read the title. Irrevocable Trust and Beneficiary Designation. Vairal shifted her confused gaze from the paper to her father, then to me. What does this mean? She asked. I leaned back in my chair and calmly folded my hands. This is why you wasted your time coming here. I tapped the document in front of Cale. This structure was created 15 years ago. Nix is the sole heir to my estate, all business connections and mentorship resources. It is a legally binding document that cannot be revoked without his personal consent. I took out another page from the folder and placed it next to the first. And this is the waiver of parental rights that your father signed the day I learned of the affair. Voluntary, legal, and final. Vairal grabbed the sheet and began to read it greedily. Her hands were visibly shaking. You forced him to give up his own son? She whispered. No, I gave him a choice. My tone remained steady and businesslike. Either a public paternity case with all the ensuing details, or a quiet exit. He chose to disappear. 6 in the morning, a diner on 5th Street. It took him less than 5 minutes to decide. The girl looked at Cale. "Is that true?" Her voice broke. "Daddy, is that true?" Cale did not answer. Finally, he said quietly, "I was 25. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." "I don't care." My voice cut through his excuses like a sharp blade. He fell silent. "You made your choice. I made mine. I chose Nick's. I raised him. I paid for his education. I taught him how to negotiate, how to make the right connections, and how to create what has value. Biology means nothing. Loyalty means everything." Sora leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. "But we are his biological brother and sister. Doesn't that matter? He has relatives he has never seen and does not wish to know." Those words struck hard. Sora flinched. I continued, "Do you want to know why I treat Nix differently? Because he earned it. He became a person worth investing in. Every day, he proved his reliability by choosing honesty over convenience. He never once asked me for anything he hadn't earned through his own work." I gathered the documents back into a stack and aligned them neatly. "You came here seeking fairness, but you don't understand one thing. Fairness has already been served. Nix has a father who stayed. You have the one who left. Those are the consequences of decisions made 15 years ago." Cale abruptly stood up, his chair scraping the floor. "Zarin, they are just children. They don't deserve to be punished for my mistakes." "Sit down," I ordered. He obeyed. "I am not punishing them. I am simply not rewarding them. Those are different things." I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and looked at each of them in turn. Vairal's eyes were red with tears. Sora looked as if he had been physically struck. Cale seemed utterly broken. "This meeting is over. Do not try to contact me again, and do not dare disturb Nix. The trust is fully protected. All contracts are signed. There is nothing to discuss and nothing to negotiate." Cale's voice was hoarse. "You can't just—" For the last time, I reached into the second folder and pulled out a final document, placing it directly in front of him. It was a draft cease and desist letter, already filled out with his name and today's date in the corner. "If you or your children attempt to contact Nix or interfere in his life in any way, this document will be put into effect. Harassment, attempted financial coercion, I have lawyers who would be happy to earn their fees." I tapped the table again. "You can't fight the contracts. These are the very papers you signed 15 years ago in that diner. History cannot be rewritten. You created it yourself when you slept with my wife while I was paying your rent." Vairal cried quietly, trying to hide her sobs. I took both folders and tucked them under my arm. "We are done." Cale stood up again, his voice trembling. "Zarin, please, just listen." "No." I turned toward the exit. Behind me came Vairal's desperate cry. "Please, wait." I took hold of the door handle, without turning around or slowing my pace. The door closed behind me with a distinct click. I walked through the restaurant, past the bar and the host stand, and out to the parking lot. The pre-September sun was shining brightly. Traffic hummed in the distance, the ordinary sounds of a Saturday afternoon. I got into my car, placed the folders on the passenger seat, and started the engine, never once looking back at the building. Inside that private room, silence had fallen, as heavy as a physical weight. I knew this because I had planned it all. Vairal was surely staring at the documents scattered across the table. Sora was waiting for an explanation from his father that would never come. And Cale simply sat there, crushed by 15 years of his own decisions, now laid out before him in black and white. Sooner or later, a waiter would approach them and ask if they needed anything else. They would not answer. What can you say when the ground gives way beneath your feet and everything you believed in turns to dust? I pulled out of the parking lot and merged into traffic. My phone sat in the cup holder. No notifications. Nix and I had agreed in advance that he would stay out of this conversation. No contact until it was over. I didn't text him. There was no need yet. I drove across town, parked in my home garage, and took the elevator up. In the apartment, I went straight to my study, unlocked my desk drawer, and put both folders inside. I locked them again, not to reread or stir up the past, but simply to have them on hand if someone decided to test my boundaries. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, no ice, and sat by the window, looking down at the street. Across town, in that restaurant room, they were still sitting there. I was sure of it. The truth is a crushing thing, especially when you have avoided it for a decade and a half, and suddenly it appears before you in the form of indisputable documents, signatures, and dates that cannot lie. Vairal came for opportunities. Sora came for family. Kale came because his children made him. And perhaps some part of his soul hoped that time had softened me. Instead, they ran into a wall built from unbreakable contracts and a history that cannot be fixed. The waiter had probably approached them 3 times already. They still hadn't moved. Kale, most likely, had not taken his eyes off the waiver of parental rights, his own signature at the bottom, made just 24 hours after I confronted him in that diner. A choice made in less than 5 minutes, because saving his own career then meant more to him than acknowledging his son. Vairal was trying to comprehend that her father, the man she knew and loved, had done all of this: infidelity, betrayal, abandonment. Sora was silent, processing what he had seen, and the silence continued to press down on them. I finished my whiskey and put down the glass. Tomorrow, I have a meeting about a new contract in the mining sector. On Tuesday, Nix is flying in to discuss the strategy for his next career move. He has been offered an excellent position in Geneva, and he wants to weigh the pros and cons. Life went on. That's what they didn't understand when they came to me for mentorship and support. I built my empire without looking back. I built it by making a choice 15 years ago. Protect what matters and walk away forever from what doesn't. Nix mattered, so I stayed. They did not, so I left. It was that simple. My phone vibrated. Finally, a message from Nix. "It's done?" I quickly typed back, "It's done." 3 dots appeared on the screen, then disappeared. "Good," he sent, and that was all. No follow-up questions, no need for details. He understood what today had been about and why it had to happen. We will never speak of it again. I put down my phone and looked out the window at the city. Saturday evening. People walking their dogs, couples going out to dinner. Ordinary life flowing along. And somewhere out there, 3 people are sitting at a table, surrounded by papers proving that their father destroyed one family and abandoned his own child. They came for access to what I had built, and instead they were buried under the rubble of what he had destroyed. No grand speeches about revenge, no dramatic scenes, no reconciliation. Only facts, heavy enough to crush them with the weight of decisions made 15 years ago. And I walked away from it again. Not because I forgave, but because I no longer needed to carry that burden. I built something better than revenge. A life so solid that their regrets could not even touch it. Nix will succeed regardless of whether Kale acknowledges him. The trust will remain unshakable regardless of whether Vairal understands the reasons. My boundaries will remain eternal regardless of whether any of them accept them. Their understanding and approval do not matter. What matters is that 15 years ago, I made a decision and stayed true to it, while Kale chose a different path. And now, sitting in that silent room with scattered documents, they have to live with that. I stood up, rinsed my glass, and put it in the dishwasher. Tomorrow, I will wake up and continue building my life. They will wake up and remain among the ruins of theirs. This is not cruelty, it is consequences, and I made sure that they carry this burden alone.